our next discussion, please welcome Neil Blumenthal, co-founder of Warby Parker, and Leigh Gallagher, assistant managing editor and TV host for Fortune magazine.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. Neil, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So a couple years ago, I might have started by saying, raise your hand if you know what Warby Parker is. But I think I'll start by saying the opposite. Raise your hand if you don't know what Warby Parker is. OK, I think I saw three hands.
Okay. We'll find you later and try and sell you a pair of glasses.
Well, here's a couple stats that will help everyone get oriented with where Warby Parker is now. Warby Parker is a digital eyewear retailer. You'll do a better job of explaining more about it in a minute. But Warby Parker was founded in 2010, a few blocks from here at Wharton, and now has 600 employees, has raised $215 million, and earlier this spring was given a valuation of $1.2 billion, which makes it a member of the so-called Unicorn Club, which we heard about a little bit before. It is the second largest eyewear-only brand, we think, after Ray-Ban
and Oakley, so maybe
and
third.
Oakley, so maybe third. Anyway, in a very short time, that is a lot of accomplishment. But Neil, I want to start by just asking you to take us back to those early years in 2010 when you were at Wharton. How did the idea come about? Take us back to that. I think it was a computer lab?
Yeah, so literally a few blocks down the street on Walnut in Huntsman Hall, Dave, Jeff, Andy, and I were in the computer lab because we had to print something out before class, and we were talking about glasses. And Dave had just lost a pair of $700 glasses in the seat pocket of an airplane. He had worked at a bank before going to business school, so he could afford a $700 pair of glasses. Likewise, Jeff had a pair of sort of like messed up Prada glasses that he hadn't replaced in a while because they were expensive. Andy was sort of noticing how all these categories were being sold online, like Blue Nile selling engagement rings, Zappos selling shoes, categories that you didn't think could be sold online. And I was sitting there, I'm a nonprofit guy, but I was a nonprofit guy that was training low-income men and women to start their own businesses, giving eye exam and selling glasses in the developing world. So I knew a little bit about how to design and manufacture glasses, knew a little bit about the industry, and suddenly it sort of, the light bulb went off for all of us. Like, well, why don't we design and produce the glasses that we love and sell them at prices that are reasonable because we can go direct to consumer online. So we could bypass the middlemen, bypass the retailers and sell it sort of below wholesale. And because we would do it under our own brand, we wouldn't even have to sort of pay a licensing fee to another company.
So that was the idea. That was the light bulb moment. But then how did you take it from that to a company in just a couple short months while you were at Wharton in your last semester, right?
Yeah, so, well, we started thinking about it during our first semester. Mm-hmm. So then we spent a lot of time putting it together. And I would argue that the sort of lean startup methodology and minimum viable product is completely the right approach and theory.
And explain that theory for a second, just
sure. It's the idea is how can you invest as little time and money into an idea to get it to something that you could test, so that way you have more confidence in it before you start investing a lot of time and money into something. So how do you get something in front of customers and initially get feedback so you can iterate on it before spending years on something and taking a big risk and failing. And I would say that minimum viability for a fashion accessory is a bit higher than it is for some app per se. So we spent a lot of time thinking through what the brand stood for, working on our first collection, making sure that it was really good quality. Right? Glasses are also a health product, so we needed to make sure that we didn't mess around and that we were using top quality lenses with good coatings that we could fulfill with the right prescriptions. But those first few months, the big thing is leverage. right? So well, if you want to build a business, well, why don't we sign up for a class that you have where the only piece of work is a business plan? We're gonna have to build a business plan anyway. Might as well get credit for it. So we started doing that. Suddenly, every meeting or class that we were taking, the only thing that was top of our mind was the business. So it was a management class. How do we apply that to the business that we were doing? Oh, we have a marketing class with the sort of foremost expert on pricing. Let's talk to him about how we should price our glasses. We initially thought that we could sell $500 glasses for $45. And we had this beautiful PowerPoint. And if there was one thing that we could do, it was make PowerPoints, because Andy had been an investment banker. Both Dave and Jeff had been management consultants. We made pretty PowerPoints. And we went into this meeting with our professor, and we had this great deck. We put it on his desk, and we said, we're going to transform the optical industry. We're going to sell $500 glasses for $45. And he slid the deck back at us and said, no way. And he said, you guys are doomed to fail. And we were like, what are you talking about? Look, this is a beautiful slide, and the arrow goes up and to the right. And he said, at $45, you're outside the realm of believability. You can't tell me that you're selling the same quality product for a tenth of its price. And whatever you think your cost of goods are, it's going to be much more than you think, and you're going to have no gross margin, which means that you won't be profitable and you won't have any money to market with, so nobody will even know you exist. So we walked out of that meeting with our heads held low, and that's sort of the entrepreneurial journey, right? How do you take a bunch on the chin? But the intent there is not to ignore advice, but to actually think through it. And it's like, okay, maybe they're right. So what did we do? We mocked up a version of our product page, so a beautiful picture of glasses, and we created a few versions of it at different price points, starting at like $45 all the way through like $500. And we surveyed different groups of people, randomized samples, and we asked them one simple question: how likely are you to purchase this pair of glasses? And we found that the willingness to purchase actually increased with price, which was very counterintuitive to us, up until $100, at which point it started to come down. And that led us to believe $100 is sort of a psychological barrier, but price being one of the biggest indicators of quality, it couldn't be too cheap. So then we thought, well, should it be $99? And then we thought, well, 99 sounds discounting and sounds cheap and looks cheap. Why don't we do $95? So that's sort of where the science and the art sort of comes into play, where we gave up, right, the equivalent of 4%, right, $4 of gross margin, just because of the perception that we wanted it to be, where 95 felt very deliberate. So we literally spoke to every classmate, every professor.
So everyone knew you were doing this. Everyone was like, oh, those guys that are starting. You probably didn't have a name for it yet.
No, we called it One Vision to start. Terrible name.
When did you switch it to Warby Parker?
It was one of the last things that we did, because the first thing that you have to do is create a brand architecture and core values and what you stand for, and then that can influence, right, what the name should be for this sort of being. So we spent, once we had the brand architecture down, it took us 6 months to come up with a name. We went through 2,000 iterations. It was a nightmare. Naming is like the hardest thing in the world.
And the name comes from, just explain for people who don't know.
The name comes from two early Jack Kerouac characters, Warby Pepper and Zag Parker. And when we were working on the brand architecture, we kept coming back to this idea that Warby Parker should stand for fun, creativity, doing good in the world. Who are people that exemplify that? Writers, right? Because writers often live these crazy lives and have these great stories. They're obviously super creative, but also, right, the act of writing itself gives back to community and is a form of education and learning, and what represents sort of learning and reading better than a pair of glasses. So that led us to the path towards looking at writers for inspiration.
So what was the moment when you kind of saw, like, whoa, this could really be something? This might actually work. Was it right after you actually launched and went public with it, or when was that moment for you?
Yeah, I think we all had a deep belief that this could work. We weren't going to bet our careers on it, so I actually had an offer to go to McKinsey after school. Dave had a couple offers. Likewise, Jeff had promised to go back to the private equity fund he was at. Andy also had an offer. So I say that just to try to debunk the myth that entrepreneurs are these crazy risk takers, right, that are willing to jump off a cliff and take these crazy leaps of faith. But I think that the real aha moment was literally the moment we turned on the website. And we knew we were building a fashion brand, so the three things that we invested in was our product, the website so we could sell the product, and then fashion PR because we were building this fashion brand. And we were able to get into Vogue and GQ, and we knew we were going to be in the GQ, the March issue of GQ, and being a little naive, we thought that the March issue came out in March. But the March issue comes out in February. And like
Spoken by someone who's never been a reader of women's magazines, obviously. But yeah, go ahead.
And we were building the website, and we expected the website to be open by holiday, so it wouldn't be an issue. But like with all things, right, it takes twice as long and it's twice as expensive. So come like the beginning of February, the website's still not up. We get a call from the fashion director at GQ. It's like, hey guys, like this is running in the book. It's going to hit subscribers' doorsteps on February 15th. Get the website up. So we're scrambling, and literally midnight at like February 14th, we get the website up. We didn't tell our friends because we didn't know if it was going to work or not. And literally on the 15th, our friends, our classmates were like, hey guys, you know your website's up. And we were like, oh yeah, we put it up. We were like, are you going to tell anybody? And we were like, in a little bit. And literally, the company took off like a rocket ship. GQ called us the Netflix of eyewear because we have this home try-on program where you select 5 frames, we ship it to you free of cost. You have 5 days to try it on at home. They also had a full-page spread of our glasses right next to Bottega Veneta, Persol, and Tom Ford. And very nondescriptly, they had a price list on it, and it was like $495, $395, $350, and then $95. And literally, we hit our first year sales targets in 3 weeks, sold out of our. It was madness.
What did your classmates think of all this, or your professors? Were they like, I can't believe this actually worked? Like, what was the reaction?
Suddenly, everybody was like, I told you that was a good idea. I believed in this idea from the very beginning. But no, our classmates were so awesome throughout the entire process. And it's funny, every so often you meet somebody and you ask them, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm starting a new business. It's like, oh, what is it? It's like, it's in stealth mode. Like, stealth mode? Like, first of all, you sound like a complete jerk, like saying that. But otherwise, I also believe that it takes a certain bit of hubris to believe that you're the only person with this idea. You're the only person in the entire world that has this idea for this business, that's working on it. First of all, if you are indeed the only person with this idea, then the market's not ready for it yet. So the business is going to fail. If you're a normal human being and other people have the same idea, the only way you're going to succeed is if you execute really well. And the only way to execute really well is to have the support of your family, of your friends, of your classmates and people around you, and they can only support you if they know what you're working on. So everybody knew what we were doing. We talked to our classmates that had worked in e-commerce, that had worked in fashion, that worked in manufacturing, you name it, and we just, people were so generous with their time.
What did your parents think? What did your family think?
They were always super supportive. I mean, they figured that this was probably a better career choice than my nonprofit work beforehand, in which I was spending a lot of time in rural villages in like Bangladesh and India and Ghana and having a lot of GI issues. I think they thought that,
step up from that.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that has made Warby Parker so successful is that it's got a kind of social mission component. It's not just glasses. It's a lifestyle. It's if you buy Warby Parker, you believe in making the world a better place. And not to get overly idealistic. I mean, some of these companies can sound that way, but and it's really speaking to the millennial consumer who wants to kind of feel like they are selecting this lifestyle for themselves. So tell us about that a little bit, about how the meaning of a brand in today's age has kind of changed.
Yeah, I think for one thing is that early on, right, we could have just created a website. At the time that we launched, less than 1% of glasses were sold online. So we probably could have just created a website that sold glasses. But we thought that doesn't really create much of a competitive advantage. Like, brands are defensible, right? People develop relationships with brands. And then also in the world of e-commerce, you never want to do anything that Amazon can potentially do. So if we were
Rule number one.
Yeah, rule number one is, so if we were selling other people's product, that means that Amazon could potentially buy it. But if we were selling our own brand, we could decide never to sell it at Amazon. So after making the decision, let's build a brand, the question is, what's that going to stand for? And we wanted to create a brand and a place to work that we want to come to work every day. And that is really about being a mission-driven organization. So for one thing, we wanted to treat consumers fairly, just because we felt like whenever we walked into an optical shop and we walked out, we usually didn't feel very good because we had been excited about a pair of glasses, but throughout the process, you're constantly being upsold and you walk out feeling like you've been punched in the stomach. So we want to serve our customers. We wanted to serve our employees by creating learning and growth opportunities. We wanted to consider the environment in what we do. So how do we knew that, right? Most businesses, all businesses have negative environmental impacts. So you can't avoid them, but you can certainly mitigate them by reducing them. And then when you can't, like with carbon emissions, maybe you purchase carbon offsets. So that's something that we think a lot about. And then lastly, from a community standpoint, around 700 million people around the world don't have access to glasses. And while we might bring down the price of glasses to $95 here in the US, right, that doesn't help those 700 million people. So we made a commitment to distribute a pair for every pair that we sold. And we've now distributed well over 1 million pairs. And thanks. And having sort of worked in international development, I saw firsthand, like, sometimes good intentions have unintended consequences. So we wanted to do that in a really deliberate way. So that's why we support this nonprofit Vision Spring that trains low-income people start their own businesses selling the glasses. Because when you're selling the glasses, you actually treat somebody as a value-conscious consumer. You design according to their wants and needs versus like giving somebody a donated pair of 1970s cat eyes. Right? Like, you could be the poorest person on the planet and you still don't want to be ridiculed by your neighbor. Fashion matters and everybody is vain, right? And that's okay, and that's human nature. And I think the best social entrepreneurs are very practical, right? They see the world for what it is and what the status quo is, and they work within that framework. And likewise, while what gets me up in the morning, is being able to serve that broader population, I'm under no illusion that the reason why you buy a pair of glasses is because it looks good on you. So from day one, we decided we lead with fashion and design, then price, then quality and service, and lastly, our social mission. So a lot of people don't even know that we're a certified B Corp, that we distribute a pair of glasses for every pair that we sell. And that's okay. In fact, most of the messaging happens post-purchase.
So the strategy and all that, you sound like you had you were very clear on that. But how did you guys, and by the way, there were 4 co-founders at the beginning, and now it's you and Dave Gilboa, your co-CEO. How did you guys, or you, learn to lead? I mean, one of the things about these companies growing so quickly in this market is that you're a student, and then months later, you're a CEO, a co-CEO, and then months later, you're leading hundreds of people and having to communicate the strategy to them. So what about the management side of things? How was that learning curve for you?
It's funny. I was trying to figure out, like, how do you learn to do this? I did a lot of Outward Bound when I was younger, which
That'll
I actually
do it.
did.
If you can survive that, you can survive anything.
Right, and I was the equivalent of, like, I guess my president in my high school class, but you know, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to whether you care or not. And I know that may sound trite, but if you care about building an organization that's going to support people, you're going to create policies and a culture that fosters good management. And you know, when we think about why do people leave an organization, it's often because they've stopped learning or their boss is a jerk. So how can we avoid hiring jerks, but also for inexperienced people, how can we teach them how to manage and what's important and create mechanisms for them to be able to check in with their direct reports and have open and honest conversations, which actually is increasingly more difficult because you know, one of, I think, the big generational shifts between, let's say, like Gen X and Millennials is the ability to have a very direct and frank conversation. So one of the things that we actually do is we have workshops on giving and receiving feedback and having direct conversations. So we've been investing in that.
You've done a lot to build your culture. It's been written about a lot, about how you have these weekly meetings with the whole company, and you really do a lot to kind of cater to your employees, who are mostly millennials, right? I mean, do you not like that term, or there's so much talk now about managing millennials, so what has your experience been?
Yeah.
I mean, you are one, right?
I think, well, I'm not sure. I'm like on the cutoff.
You don't seem like one.
Depending on the audience, I either am or I'm not. You know, I think everybody needs to have a strategy for managing millennials, because in the next few years, they'll be over 50% of the workforce. So while we might skew a little bit more than most businesses because we hire so many people straight out of school, this is important to every business. And yeah, there are these differences in between the generations, just like there's always differences in generations. And the generation before always thinks that the generation after them is selfish and self-centered and can't communicate and what have you. And I know the generation that comes after millennials will be even worse, right? And I was even worse than the group before me. So, you know, I think it's just, it's acknowledging that, but also acknowledging the changing nature of work. I think that's a bigger issue. So, right, people are spending a lot less time at different companies. So how do you build around that? We've been playing with this idea of a tour of duty, right, where you come and maybe the commitment's for 2 years, and our promise to you is that you'll learn, and then perhaps afterwards, if there's not the growth opportunity that you want, then you know, maybe we help you get a job someplace else. But it's just, you know, you have to acknowledge that the work is changing.
I want to ask you about, I have a lot more questions, and I'm suddenly realizing we're almost going to be out of time, but I want to ask you, you're getting into brick and mortar stores. So you were built on this, you know, digital platform. Everybody knows Warby Parker because you can, you know, get your glasses by mail. And now you're getting into real stores with overhead and real estate and logistics and training staffs and shifts. It seems so complicated compared to your business. So why go there?
I guess because consumers want it and it's working. But yeah, I agree, right? Like writing software and selling software is the easiest thing in the world. It's well, not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't have some of the complexities and difficulties of finding a location, signing leases. Right? We're opening a store in Austin, and we expect to be open by now, but the floor just collapsed while we were putting the finishing touches on it. And it turns out there was a storm drain under the building that the landlord didn't even know about. And I don't know if you guys have been following, but there have been these crazy rains in Texas and all this flooding. And we have video of a roaring river under our store. And the joke in the office was, well, let's just be a nice water element for the store. But right, there are these things that pop up that you wouldn't even imagine. I mean, it makes it exciting, but at times a little less fun. But what happened with us is, and I'll use a little jargon, but we like to think of ourselves as experience-focused but medium agnostic. And what I mean by that is that when we launched, it was all about e-commerce, but e-commerce was just a means to an end. The ends was the direct relationship with the customer, that sort of vertical integration, so that way we could sell for a fraction of what other people were selling. It just happened that building a website was cheaper than opening a store and was scalable. Now, when we were doing that, we were thinking just about desktop. Now, right, we think just about mobile. And I know a few years from now, we'll be thinking just about something else. I don't know what it will be. It might be virtual reality. Who knows? But I know for certain it's not going to be just mobile. And what happens when we launched, as I mentioned, sort of the company took off. Within 48 hours, we had to suspend the home try-on program because we ran out of inventory. And people started calling up saying, hey, can we come into your office to try on glasses? We were working out of my apartment in the Riverloft buildings right on Walnut Street. And we invited some people to come in to the apartment. And I don't know what we were thinking, but we made sure to only invite a few people, so that way if we ruined our reputation, it was only with those select few. And I remember the very first person that came in was in scrubs. He was a resident at the hospital at the University of Penn. And we built this great rapport, and he ended up being this amazing advocate for us. And literally, it was a pretty suboptimal experience, right? The glasses were on the dining room table. Checkout was Dave's laptop, just using the website. But right, this person sort of had a peek behind the curtain, saw us cranking away, processing orders on the couch, saw big boxes of glasses. And that's how you sort of build relationships. I believe that brands can build relationships with customers just as human beings build relationships with other human beings, which is often through vulnerability. And in this case, we were being pretty vulnerable. But that was the first step into bricks and mortar, where when we opened a proper office, we decided to allocate some of the space to a store. We paid a little bit extra to be centrally located near public transportation with southern-facing windows, with good natural light. We had some West Elm desks this time that had the glasses on it. And suddenly more and more people started coming and buying glasses. Then we splurged and built some shelves on the wall. We bought some full-length mirrors because we quickly discovered people prefer full-length mirrors versus the head mirrors. Has anyone bought glasses? How often do you see a full-length mirror in an optical shop? Like, never, right? Pretty basic. We learned this in like 2 hours. And it just goes to show you, like, you need to be constantly rethinking. Don't just take the status quo for granted. Just think about how to respond to customers. Anyway, long story short, that we were on track to do over $1.5 million in sales through this like couple hundred square foot part of our office. So that gave us the confidence to do some pop-up stores. We bought an old yellow school bus, ripped out the interior, made it really beautiful, turned it into a mobile store that went to over 15 cities. And in each city, we were in 2 and 3 locations, so I could tell you which intersections perform best and where we should open a store. So then
You're going to open one in Philly?
You
have a lot of memories here.
Yes. I don't know if it's public yet. I don't know what to say. I guess I could say
we're going to break some news.
We were always absolutely going to open a store in Philly, and we are in process of doing so. I can't reveal any details yet, but we will be. Yeah. Who's ever in 402 in Riverloft?
You should at least go and put a plaque there or something. So have you been following Philly's startup scene? You know, there's quite a vibrant, when you were here, there might not have been as many, but now there's a whole scene here as well. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think if it wasn't for my family, I grew up in Greenwich Village in Manhattan. We likely could have stayed here. I love Philly, where you have amazing talent. Especially right now, every startup is fighting for software engineers, data scientists, and Philly has access to that. And the great thing is that you don't have the same level of competition that you do have in the Valley or New York. Now, New York has a little bit less than the Valley, but what's nice is that you have access to sort of greater access to talent here.
You have told me that you have received a visit, been paid a visit on occasion by the following guest, Mayor Nutter. You've had some meetings with him. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think one of the other reasons why the ecosystem is so strong here is because of dynamic governance that Mayor Nutter has been leading the city in a really thoughtful way, and there are so few politicians that ask, hey, what can we do better?
But he specifically asked you, why don't you come open something here, right?
Yeah, and like, when does that happen in government? I think that's really special. And when I think about the ecosystem here, also I think about First Round Capital, which was founded here and is based here, and that was the first money into Warby Parker.
Do people know First Round Capital? Yeah, they're great VC firm.
So, right, like all the pieces are here: capital, governance, talent.
And soon maybe a Warby Parker store.
And
all right, this
soon
is
a
my
Warby
last
Parker
question,
store.
and we have to keep it brief, but the question of all these unicorns is, when are you going to go public? So I don't know if you can tell me that right now, but what are your thoughts on that? Maybe you can tell me that right now.
My thoughts are, it's really nice being private.
That's
funny.
what everybody's saying these days.
When I speak to CEOs of large companies, the two things that they wish that they did a little bit slower were expand internationally and go public. So I'm listening to some of that
You're
advice.
taking that lesson. All right,
Yeah.
well, we'll be keeping a very close eye. Neil, thank you so much. Please give
Great,
a round of
thank
applause for Neil. Great.
Thank you.
Super fun.